Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Full Metal Tuxedo Podcast. My name is Gregory, of course, your host. And tonight, I'm not sure it's going to be the longest episode because the main focus of today's episode is the Pentagon's UFO or UAP report, which was something that was tacked on to a funding bill for that pesky little sickness that's floating around. Well, this is kind of a thing that politicians do. I know that we do it in Canada too, but it seems to happen a lot in the United States. These big bills will get passed and a bunch of random crap will get tacked onto it that seems to have almost nothing to do with it. And I mean, I'm going to get to maybe that a little bit later, but what's interesting about the UAP report, as it were, is that it came on the heels of some interesting media a couple years ago. An organization run by Tom DeLonge, who was a member of the band Blink-182. I don't know, I didn't really follow that band. I think I was just slightly too old for that group when they came out. But I mean, it's not like I don't know any of their songs. Obviously, they were popular on the radio for a while. But anyways, Tom DeLonge, I kind of ripped him a new a-hole in my UFO series a couple years back. In one of the parts, I talked about the To the Stars Academy, a really bizarre company that he started that seemed to be about discovering and building UFO-like craft, trying to recreate or backwards engineer alien technology. And it really almost makes no sense what he had proposed. So when I looked into it more, it turned out that he actually had a series of I'm just going to say the word allegedly so I don't get any illegal trouble. Alleged shell companies that I found that he was allegedly shifting money around from one to the other for various reasons. To the Stars Academy had been supposedly lent a bunch of money from a bunch of his other shell companies. And depending on how much money they made in the investment, because they started selling stocks for this company. And in a few days, they'd already sold thousands of them. But it turns out, though, that the company is really more of a media company, that their main focus is creating media that, let's just say, is supposed to convince you that aliens and or their technology exists. It's a very different thing from we're going to build our own UFOs. They do have an R&D department, though. They have played around with different materials. I know that I've seen a little bit of material that sort of shows them testing different things. They actually purchased a chunk of metal off of Linda Moulton Howe. I've spoken about her several times. And she was like really good friends with Art Bell, you know, the spiritual grandfather of the Full Metal Tuxedo podcast. And Tom DeLonge and his crew tested the metal, and they were supposed to be able to get it to float. And guess what? It did not do that. And I can't say that I'm even remotely surprised. So the material that Linda sold him was supposedly off of a wrecked crash. Some say Roswell. You know, Art Bell and Linda Moulton Howe being such iconic characters in the whole, what do you want to call it, supernatural, extranatural realm of study and entertainment that, you know, we're all so fond of and part of. They would often get gifted or get the opportunity to buy special items that, you know, the average person wouldn't be able to get. So there was reason to believe that maybe it really was an alien piece of metal. But you guys know my position on aliens. Or do you know my position? Because I was actually kind of thinking about that while I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about tonight. And I realized that some people seem to be a little confused about my position on aliens. I often say they're not real, but let me clarify what I mean by that. The statistical likelihood that there is no other life in the universe is basically zero. There almost must be. Like, that's how statistically unlikely it is. There must be. Even if it's just some microbes underneath some mercury ice on a distant moon rotating around a gas giant around a white dwarf, I don't care. That's life, and that's an alien. But when we're talking about things that can travel from star to star, that can interact with us, that can enter our atmosphere, and that's a whole different thing. And I'm really, really not sold on that idea. However, I do think that it's very likely that there are others. But what that means exactly, well, it depends on which line of thought, I guess, you want to follow. Is it more the philosophical line of thought, like, oh, they're others, but they're still here on Earth, they're with us, so they're not aliens. They're just another species or a subspecies or something, or they're even more ancient than us, or they've been here longer than us. That's something that a lot of UFO people will say, is that these aliens have been here for thousands of years, even before us. And Linda Moulton Howe, she'll often say that aliens engineered us. And I guess that's the other sort of line of thought you can use, is the more biblical, religious, spiritual sort of perspective. Because there's a lot of different lines of thought as to what these others could be. Are they even really physical? Or, sorry, I should say solid. Obviously, they're physical if we're seeing them. But what are they made of? Are they beings of light? Are UFOs what the people in the biblical era used to call angels? Watchers, messengers of God? I've spoken about some of those terms in previous episodes before, and used them to refer to ancestors of humanity, the Denisovan, to be more specific. But what if there is like a more spiritual messenger? Because the Bible does suggest that there is such a thing as an angel of light, a being of light. And it even goes as far as to say that there are things such as, demons or Satan or whatever that can pose or mimic or present themselves as beings of light. And I guess for like a long time, I did think UFOs were real physical metal solid craft that were literally from other planets, that did have little green men on them, and that they were visiting us for one reason or another. But I don't know why or how specifically, but I started entertaining other lines of thought about them, and I came to the conclusion that I'm kind of on the Christian side of the argument here, that a lot of evidence seems to be stacking up that a lot of what we're told about this, specifically in the mainstream, a lot of the stuff that ends up getting out, it's manipulative. We're not really being told the whole truth, and we're being sort of led to believe this very specific thing about these others, as it were, that they are these little green men from other planets, that they're superior to us. And there is a conspiracy theory. People have called it different things. One of them is a Project Blue Beam, which is this blue beam laser technology that can project holographic images into the air for various purposes. The idea of it is sold as like you create fake targets so that it decreases the likelihood that you'll get shot because people will be shooting at fake targets. But hypothetically, that technology could be used to create fake UFOs, fake aliens, and a fake alien invasion. Now, I really I know that is one of the crazier conspiracy theories that I've ever entertained. But I've been thinking about it a lot more lately. This idea of not necessarily there being that specific technology employed to create a fake alien invasion, but that there is some fakery, some screwballness around this whole idea of UFOs, what we're being told. And I almost wonder now if that isn't something that we should be looking out for with some of the language that we've been hearing in the media. But anyways, before I get too deep into that, I guess, let's just sort of go over this UFO report. So this To the Stars Academy, like I said, they've sort of released a bunch of UFO videos. I debunked a couple of them, and then the media started doing these rounds where they were showing off Louis Elizondo, who used to be the head, supposedly, of this unidentified aerial phenomenon identification program that was being run through the Pentagon. This program was funded and, I think it was funded by taxpayer money. Yeah, it was. But it was proposed by Deuce Bigelow. No, what's his name? Bob Bigelow. So, Bigelow, famously from Bigelow Ranch, also known as Skinwalker Ranch, he is an extremely wealthy, powerful aerospace technology engineer / company owner. The United States military does many contracts through him. Excuse me. So when he shows up to the Pentagon and says, hey, look, I want $1.5 million to look into UFOs, they're like, well, we have already given you billions upon billions of dollars. What's a little bit of chump change? We'll put this little program together for you. The rumor is that it was sort of a lackluster effort to sort of collect different examples of unidentified aerial phenomenon. And at the end of it, it sort of petered off, and members of the organization sort of lost interest in it. Even the way Louis Elizondo described it was so bizarre. Like, even though he was the head of it, it wasn't his only job, and he was doing most of his work on it sort of on the side. And he even said most of the members of the organization or that department or whatever the hell were working in that way, that it was sort of like a side project that nobody really was too passionate about. But Louis Elizondo says, oh, no. I'm quite passionate about this. I'm quitting so that I can tell the public all about this. And it just so happened to perfectly coincide with Tom DeLonge releasing the UFO videos, so Louis Elizondo got to talk about those, and talking about To the Stars Academy, which, oh, guess what? Louis Elizondo got hired onto To the Stars Academy. So I called bullshit. I was like, this is obviously bullshit. You guys are just selling us UFOs to get us to invest in your company. And like, it's a really bad sign when, as a Canadian, I'm not allowed to invest in it, that there's literally a disclaimer on their website that says you cannot invest if you're Canadian, because what that means is that they're breaking some sort of regulation that we have here in Canada about investment that disqualifies them from being able to accept Canadian customers. So yeah, huge red flags everywhere, including the whole alleged shell company thing. DeLonge even went on, like, DeLonge was doing his rounds too. There was a pilot that collected footage of that famous Tic Tac UFO over the ocean as well. Yeah, I talked about all of those. I don't know that I could say that I properly debunked them necessarily. But anyways, a few months, almost a year later, I think, the Pentagon finally comes out and they're just like, yeah, those videos are authentic. But that doesn't mean what you're looking at is legitimate footage of actual aliens in metallic flying saucers from another planet. What they mean is that footage that you saw was indeed real military footage captured from a real military camera on a real military vehicle or craft or something, showing footage of something that they can't identify. That's it. That's all that means. It means it's legitimate, genuine footage of something that they can't identify. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, Greg, your debunk didn't work. You know, the Pentagon came out and said you're wrong. It is real." But no, my debunk still stands because they've only ended up sort of adding more videos of essentially the same sort of thing. These amorphous, blobby balls or blocks of light that are barely moving, that are sort of not really all that dynamic. They tend to stay center screen, and then sometimes they'll just sort of dart off so fast that the camera can't follow them. And I mean, that is interesting, but in and of itself doesn't really mean anything. I would say that the most likely outcome, the most likely explanation for these is some sort of technology from a foreign country like, you know, China. And I have suggested in previous podcasts that a lot of this UFO bullshit that we're getting in the media is sort of, it's sort of a mix of being a distraction and an explanation for weird fuckery that we're experiencing during a Cold War state. When we were in a Cold War with Russia, that's when all the craziest shit was happening. Bigfoots, UFOs, Mothmen, all that stuff. Cold War, Cold War, Cold War, Cold War. Well, we're getting that same weird, bizarre, nonsensical cycle of news information today. Cold War. China is not our friend anymore. Even they decided after we set our economy up so that everything filters through them before we get it, that now they're the most important country in the world and they get to decide where resources go, when, how many, why. Scary stuff. And I mentioned that in a previous podcast as well. Pharmaceuticals are included in that. How terrifying is that? So, in that same way, I think that the report for the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Program that was tacked on to the COVID bill. Sorry, I meant, God damn it, I said the word. The crazy global disease situation bill. And yeah, I can't help but feel that that was tacked on to that bill for the exact same reason that UFO information is tacked on to media in general, into stories in general, because they wanted to distract from other things that were tacked onto that bill as well. And because think about it, how much focus was there on this UFO report when there were other things that arguably are considerably more nefarious that were added to this bill, things that I don't even want to go over. So, but that being said, this proposal to add this, report to the funding bill was about sort of cinching off the ends of this news piece that had been floating around for the last year or two, talking about the Pentagon's UFO footage, and because there were a bunch of senators and Congress people and stuff that had commented on it, because it is a really weird use of taxpayer money to have a whole program dedicated to just trying to figure out what things are that nobody knows what they are. And even more frustrating so when after 1.5 million, something like that. It wasn't a ton of money relative to other programs that run through the Pentagon, including those trillions of dollars that have gone missing. Oh God. But $1.5 million, that's a lot of money. That's more money than most of us will ever see in our entire lives. And I guess it's not totally unwarranted to want a report, to want some sort of public statement so that everybody would get an idea of like what this organization was officially doing, because all we've really had up to this point was just the wishy-washy word of Louis Elizondo, and like I've said many times before, I don't trust the man. Anyways, the Pentagon Preliminary Assessment Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. It was set to release no later than the 25th of June, 2021. And they released it literally right at the end of the day. So it took them so long to come out with it. You know, I was thinking, no, there's got to be something half interesting in there. But I wasn't expecting much. I would even go as far as to say I wasn't really expecting anything. If anything, I would say that I was expecting this report to sort of just dismiss the idea, almost like it's putting it to bed. Or, I don't know, just acknowledging it at very least and giving examples. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't expecting anything, but I was still disappointed. I don't know how, but they managed to only type up 9 pages. And not including the cover and the appendices, technically it's 6 pages. That's fucking pathetic. Greg Newkirk from the Hellier series and the Paranormal Museum, he posted a funny meme about it. UFO report in a nutshell. Fuck you. All right, so that's about it. This couldn't possibly have been more fitting. So essentially, to skip to the end real quick before I go over this report, the conclusion is they don't know. And that's the part we already knew. We already knew that they didn't know, because none of us know. Well, maybe some people know. But the only thing in the however many years, the 5 years or whatever that this department or whatever was operating under the Department of Defense's watchful eye, they only managed to identify one, and it was a deflated balloon. Not exactly the most exciting read. Oh yeah, I wanted to give another example. I was thinking about making a video about this, but honestly, the debunk is so simple, it almost feels like it's not worth my time. But you know what? Whatever. Maybe I will make the video. But okay, so one of the more recent UFO videos that released was this triangle that was this flashing triangle that was flying over a some sort of military vessel. I think it was a destroyer off the top of my head, but I don't remember. Night vision camera shooting up into the night sky, zooms in, and you can see this green triangle flashing. And they were selling this as a pyramid-shaped or a triangle-shaped UFO for years. Well, not years, for months. And I wasn't buying it. And it didn't take too long before I was able to find exactly what the hell was going on there. So one thing I noticed the second time, one of the first times I watched the video, was as the camera is zooming into that triangular UFO that's flashing, there are many, many other lights in the sky that are also triangular, but no article that I read, no commenter that I listened to, no podcast that I listened to, no videos I watched about it. Nobody acknowledged the fact that that triangle UFO wasn't the only triangular light in the sky. Well, there's a very simple answer to that. See, cameras have irises just like your eyes do, but the irises are a little bit more angular. So like lines, and they will collapse in on themselves, creating, well, if you just Google camera aperture, you'll see what looks like an iris of an eye, a mechanical iris. Well, in high production films and high production television shows, what they'll do to separate the focal point, which is usually the characters, from the background and the foreground, is they'll make the focal length really shallow so that only the people you want in focus are in focus and everything else is not. And the way you do that is by opening the aperture up. And the way you make it so you can focus on everything, no matter how far away or how close, you know, to a certain degree, you close the aperture down, make it smaller. And that difference in the shape that the light takes as it's entering the camera will completely change the depth of your photo. And the things that are out of focus in your background will take the exact shape of your aperture. So if you look up the word bokeh, I think it's spelled B-O-K-E-H or A-H, bokeh. This is something that we filmers and photographers are wildly familiar with. This is something that we do on purpose to our images to add character to them. If there is a light, like a street light, a Christmas light, anything like that, in the background that's out of focus, not only will that light bloom up and blur much larger than it was, it will take the exact shape of the aperture of the camera. And you'll notice this with productions that have specific types of cameras. The most common is a 5 plate or a 5 sheet iris, and then there's also one with six angles on it. Those two are among the most common with certain types of productions. Well, okay. Anyways, long story short, the night vision camera that they use to film the UFO, the most common type of night vision camera that they use for that specific type of operation, has 3 blades. As in, the iris takes the shape of a fucking triangle, which explains why every light in the sky is a triangle. The thing flying over that fucking ship is just a plane. And the reason it's flashing is because planes have flashing lights. Now, we had to listen to that shit in the media cycle for like 2 weeks. Wasn't that annoying? 2 weeks. See, I know that I talk about how much I hate the media all the time. Do not like the media. Please stop believing the things that the mainstream media tells you. But the fact that they entertain such ridiculous things, trying to sell them to us as aliens for weeks or months at a time like this, when people like me, people like Thunderfoot, Goddard's Ladder, dude, there's a ton of us that spend time debunking this shit. And it's scary. It's getting to the point of scary that they are just this blatant with us, so brazen with their manipulation and their lies in the way that they present information to us. So, what time is it? Oh, we've only been doing this half an hour. God damn. Okay. So the scope and the assumptions of the report here. It's in consultation with the Secretary of Defense and the Senate report, 116-233, the Authorization Act, fiscal for the fiscal year of 2021. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So anyways, so there's the whole concept of unidentified aerial phenomenon. The fact that this report sort of cinches that the United States military now officially refers to UFOs as UAP. And I really like that distinction. But that distinction is another reason why I think that they know that they're not like physical craft, that we're not talking about shiny metal discs from Mars flying in our upper atmosphere, that we're talking about something that appears to behave in a somewhat intelligent manner, yet seems to not really fit any physical qualities that we know that physical objects can demonstrate. Of course, the fact that they can do more than 9 Gs. The average human passes out around 7, and a well-trained pilot with the right flight suit can achieve 9 or 10. Yeah, but some of these UFOs are cracking somewhere around 15 or more. That suggests that there is nothing living inside. And I love that we're living in this era of drones. Everyone owns drones. I own a drone. Everyone has drones. Yet that concept is never entertained in the media. Like, oh, how are these aliens cracking 15 Gs? Oh my God. It's because there's nobody in there. Or the other option is that there are physical craft, which I think is, well, I think that there are physical craft. Physical UFOs. Physical alien-like technology. But that's us. That's humans. That's secret organizations. Wacky, recluse billionaires. Underground military bases. You know, we're talking about a niche thing that is intentionally kept secret. I 100% believe that kind of thing happens because we know that it does. We know that the United States military is always between 30 and 50 years technologically ahead of us. That a lot of the technologies that we get, like even our smartphones, our touch phones, we take this for granted today, but like I remember most of my life we didn't have these. But the military did. They would have had touch screens and bright, ultra high definition displays, and high definition imagery was invented in the 40s, and the average person didn't get it in their home until what, 2015, somewhere around there. Crazy, right? Okay. So the assumptions that they were making basically is that various forms of sensors that register unidentified aerial phenomenon generally operate correctly and capture enough real data to allow initial assessments, but some unidentified aerial phenomenon may be attributable. Oh my God, my English is so bad. Attributable to sensor anomalies. So I would really like to know more about what kind of sensor equipment that they're using, how they're determining, because obviously they've got radar, and that is one of the more common things people will say during UFO sightings is, oh yeah, we caught it on radar. But they obviously had some other equipment in use. But ultimately, though, there wasn't a lot of field work in this department. A lot of it was collecting stuff that was sent to them from the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, what have you. Like, this is stuff we found that we don't know what it is. It ends up getting filed in unidentified aerial phenomenon, goes to Louis Elizondo. They go, I don't know what it is, and then they stick it in a drawer. That seems to be where the $1.5 million went, if you're asking me. And also it went towards Louis Elizondo being able to use that on his resume to get a job at To the Stars Academy and sell to CNN and Fox News that we should all invest in that company because they're going to start building their own UFOs. Yeah. So, can you tell that I'm bitter about this? Is it blatantly obvious or only just sort of obvious? So in a limited number of incidents, UAP reportedly appeared to exhibit unusual flight characteristics. These observations could be the result of sensor errors, spoofing, or observer misinterpretation, and require additional rigorous analysis. So This is on page fucking 2. No, well, technically it's 3. But it's the second page that has writing on it. And it says, yeah, we can't trust our sensors. So yeah, we found UFOs, we found UAP, but it could just be our equipment malfunctioning. We don't know. We'll have to look into it. Fuck you. Okay. There are probably multiple types of UAP requiring different explanations based on the range of appearances and behaviors described in the available reporting. Our analysis of the data supports the construct that if and when individual UAP incidents are resolved, they will fall into one of 5 potential explanatory categories. Airborne clutter. I'd love to know what the fuck that means. Natural atmospheric phenomenon. Well, that goes for your whole ball lightning and things like that. USG, or U.S. Industry Development Programs, Foreign Advisory Systems, and catch-all other bin. So basically they're just saying it could be crazy stuff that other governments or military organizations are putting up in the air. So that's the other fucking weird thing about UFOs. So I guess the one win that we can take away from this report is that finally we have on paper the United States military acknowledging that the UFO phenomenon is real. But even in the way that they're doing it, they're still not making it sound all that believable. Like almost the first thing they say is that we don't know if we can even believe our own equipment is giving us real information, let alone the information is usable. But yeah, I would say that one of the reasons why, or if not the main reason why, the United States Air Force, or not military, but the government in general, I guess, why they wouldn't acknowledge UFOs forever, and why specifically though the different military organizations. And I've read and listened to a lot of interviews from those old school UFO guys from back in the day, and some of the ex-military people that they would interview had a really interesting perspective of it. Is often when they were out on a mission to do something and they saw something that they didn't know what it was, didn't seem human, behaved in a way they didn't understand, the normal reaction to that was to just assume that it was something from another organization of the military, because they don't really talk to each other at all. They don't communicate with each other. If they're working on secret stuff, they don't have a memo that goes around telling everybody. Part of the nature of top secret stuff is that as few people as possible know about it. And that's how the whole underground military base thing started in the first place. And then the cattle mutilations in New Mexico and that whole area is people were seeing these weird craft flying around northern New Mexico, and they seem to correlate with these cattle mutilations. And people, of course, they spun it. It's aliens doing it. They're coming to harvest something from these cows. And these cows were absolutely mutilated by something intelligent. It was not an animal. It wasn't some sort of natural phenomenon. The cuts and incisions were cauterized, which meant that they were, and that's a really big deal, because we're talking about 60s, 70s, early 80s, when very, very few medical professionals have access to medical lasers. And there is this clearly high-powered, high-precision medical laser being used to extract these parts from these cows. I maintain that was humans doing it, though, out of the Dulce, New Mexico base. And I know I'm not the only one that thinks that. The late police officer that was basically investigating the mutilations when they first started said the same thing. It was humans, but he said he couldn't say why. It does have to do with testing cattle for radiation. It has to do with making sure that the food that the American citizens were eating at the time was not irradiated, causing problems. New Mexico was ground zero to nuclear tests for, 30 years. And it was the worst place in the United States they could have done it. My favorite science YouTube channel, Veritasium, did this really interesting episode about Kodak suing the United States military because their new packages of undeveloped film, when they were being tested, quite often they would be, they would find these speckles and spots all over them. And what that meant is somehow some sort of light particle or something radioactive is passing through the paper and is interacting with the photo paper. So it turned out that the reason that this was happening was that the nuclear tests that were being done in New Mexico were spreading so much radioactive material over the United States that it was literally ruining Kodak's paper. But the agreement that they made was Kodak wouldn't tell anybody that this is why it was happening because it was still top secret at the time. And in exchange, the United States military will warn Kodak when they're going to do their nuclear tests so that they can protect their precious photo paper. But what was wild about it is that Kodak's facility wasn't in New Mexico. It wasn't even in the western side of the United States. It was in the Midwest. That radiation, that radioactive material had traveled all the way across the continent of the United States. The best place in the United States to test nukes is off of the east coast of Florida. The worst place is in New Mexico. They chose New Mexico because of how easy it would be to keep it secret. It's a desert, no real water access, very secluded, very few people living there. However, with the jet streams and the average airflow, it almost guaranteed that radioactive material would spread across the entire country. And then the cattle mutilation started because that radioactive material, after it lands in your field, in your grass, grazing animals eat it. They eat the grass that has radioactive material in it. It grows up into the grass. The grass collects it from the soil. Those radioactive materials then collect and settle in different parts of your body depending on which type it is. Certain ones will land in your thyroid. Others will land in your breast tissue or in your, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And each one would cause different problems. And yeah, it was increasing the likelihood that you were going to get kids that were sick. And it's not just, how dependent were people on cattle back then? Not just for beef, but for milk too. That was such a staple back then. Children, if you were a child back then, you had to drink milk. Milk was sold to you like you would fucking die if you didn't have a glass of milk every day. That's how strict people were. It was so weird. It's so weird. I can't remember the last time I drank a glass of milk. But yeah, back in the day. Anyways, so there was a bunch of other precautions that were made. Like iodine was added to bread. Did you guys know about that one? Iodine in the bread? You should Google that one. That was they did that to help suppress the symptoms and the likelihood of people getting sick from radiation poisoning. And then, of course, the rumor is that the fluoride in the water one of those things that every conspiracy theorist always brings up. Like, why the fuck do Americans put fluoride in their water? That's crazy. Crazy. Well, hypothetically, it can also help with radiation sickness. So, yeah, all of that correlated with the cattle mutilations. Obviously, they were just trying to figure out if they had poisoned their own population. I know a long time ago I said I was not going to tell you guys why the cattle mutilations happened, and I actually didn't plan on telling you tonight. I just sort of decided right now that. So there you go, nice little Easter egg for tonight's episode. Ultimately, though, I think that again, UFOs, UAP, what have you, regardless of what they are, when we hear about them in the media, we're not going to hear any kind of useful truth about them. Information about UFOs and whatnot is only ever disseminated to us to manipulate us or to try to steer our minds in a certain way about something, or to just straight up distract us from something that's more important. I'm not going to hold my breath for world governments to start taking this seriously. And I think that when the time comes and we can finally say as a collective that this is a real thing, and once we start to learn more about it, that we're going to find that a lot of the stuff that we were led to believe about this phenomenon was not exactly genuine, not exactly useful, not exactly truthful. So this report, it really makes me angry every time I read it, because they take every opportunity to say that they have no idea if the equipment is properly giving them the information they want. Okay, so the UAP collection challenges. Sociocultural stigmas and sensor limitations remain obstacles to collect data on UAP. Okay, sociocultural stigmas? What the fuck? When has that ever been a deterrent for the Pentagon or the United States military ever? You guys always do shit that we don't like. And there's a stigma behind like 90% of what you fucking do. If UAPs are a real thing, pull that fucking pacifier out of your mouth and figure out what the fuck they are. The fact that this report makes their attempts seem so weak-wristed, so half-assed. It's like, oh, we're trying to use that $1.5 million properly. Oh, but just like, oh, but people are so mean about UFOs, and we're like, oh, I don't want to look up UFOs today, guys. Somebody was mean to me about them. Shut the fuck up. So, narratives from aviators in the operational community and analysis from the military and IC describe disparagement associated with observing UAP. Oh my God. Reporting it or attempting to discuss it with colleagues. Yeah, no kidding. So although the effects of these stigmas have lessened as senior members of the scientific, political, military, and intelligence communities engage on the topic seriously in public, reputational risk may keep many observers silent, complicating scientific pursuit of the topic. Well, I've got a really good solution for that one. Order them to tell you. Next. The sensors mounted on U.S. military platforms are typically designed to fulfill specific missions. As a result, those sensors are not generally suited for identifying UAP. Then make one for that. Okay. But that is a good point, though, that a lot of UAP sightings seem to be caught, when they're not expecting to encounter something that can pull 15 Gs, basically. And that is a concern that especially when you go out with a jet. You know, you have a very limited loadout as to what you can fit on that jet. And I talked about in my UFO series a couple years back when I talked about To the Stars that they have a specific gimbal camera system that is really, really impressive, to be honest. But that gimbal system, it rotates the lens around in such a way that a lot of the weird aberrations and behaviors that you can see in some of these vehicles, like the weird pitches and rolls and attitudes that they take, and that can all be explained by the lens rotating, basically. And by rotating a lens, you're changing the attitude of the light that's traveling through it, and the camera is sort of seeing that as this thing is moving, this thing is behaving weird. Okay, so sensor vantage points and the numbers of sensors currently observing an object play substantial roles in distinguishing UAP from unknown objects and determining whether a UAP demonstrates breakthrough aerospace capabilities. Okay, so this is the one of the times that they sort of separate the idea of unknown flying objects from UAP. And what that I'm assuming is implying is that unknown flying objects means something we made that we just can't identify versus something that we don't think we could have made that doesn't fit what we know we can create in our own, technological paradigm today. So, I mean, like I said, it says here basically that UAP probably lack a single explanation. The UAP documented in the limited data set demonstrate an array of aerial behaviors. So basically, they think that it could be a variety of different things, which I agree with. But it would be nice if we could get something a little bit more, useful than that. Other than it could just be a bunch of different shit that we don't know. So, the program, I guess, at the end of its, 3-5 years of existence, what have you, they were meant to determine whether or not UAP were dangerous. Like, that was the main goal of this. Are they a threat to us? Do they represent something that can hurt us, that can screw with us? And they weren't even able to determine that. They weren't able to determine anything other than UAP is a real thing. UFOs are real. Like I said, that's the part we already knew. Well, okay. Let's do some super chats here. I've got my patrons listening in. They're in the live stream general chat here. How you guys doing? Nice to see you. Another thing that was in the news too. I was actually going to open with this, and I sort of forgot. It was really bad timing, or maybe really good timing, depending on how you look at it. Because I just finished 4 or 5 podcast series talking about giants and cone heads and angels and elves and the sons of God and all that. The different versions of ancient human subspecies that used to coexist with us. And only a couple days ago, an article was released stating that they found a giant skull of a human, a type of human, not sapien. Giant, they're calling it the Dragon Man. They found it in China. And this giant skull they're suggesting is either an elusive Denisovan or a new species of human that we've never discovered before. And it would be amazing if it's a Denisovan. And I gotta say, not that I'm an expert, just an enthusiast. I've spent countless hours studying human skulls. Countless hours. And I gotta say, it looks a hell of a lot like I pictured the Denisovan skull to be. It's really, really, really hard to tell right now what it is. And the fact that it's in China makes me a little nervous. I hope it doesn't, disappear, or they don't lock it up and refuse to let us study it, or just, feed us little bits of information at a time here. But I think that if they can determine that this was in fact a Denisovan, or maybe even that elusive human species that is in our genetic code that we really don't know what it is, I think that that would actually be a really good first step to proving my theory about hybrids with sapiens being known as, or manifesting as giants, or being known as the giants. And I was actually thinking about how that would work. I use the Tygon Liger analogy a lot for the human hybrid giant concept, but I don't know that I've ever really properly explained what I think my personal thought is on how that would have worked. So sapiens were very thin and long compared to other ape species, but the Denisovan, though they were taller than us, larger than us, they weren't 15 feet tall. They weren't 10 feet tall. They might not have even have been 9 feet tall. But their bones were ridiculously broad, ridiculously large, along with other species, similar species of human that existed at that time. The ones I referred to as the sons of Cain would have looked exactly the same as them, or very, 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 very similar, but would have also have been a separate species of human. Yeah. So, anyways, these very broad, thick-boned humans that we have been digging up, somewhere between the 125,000 year ago mark to about somewhere around the 50,000 year ago mark is where we're finding a lot of these, what they would call giant bones. But a lot of paleontologists and whatnot argue that they're not giants, because even though their bones are very, very thick, very broad, they represent somebody that might have been very big, absolutely, but there's no suggestion from the fragments that they found that they would have also have been very long bones. Well, that's where the whole hybrid thing comes in, because like I said, sapiens are very long and thin. And if you mix the physiology, the genetic information to create thick, broad, dense bones for a giant Denisovan, and then you add in the sapien code to also make them long, bada bing, bada boom, you've got the Nephilim. All right. So, yeah. I think, is that my, do I have to mention the cone heads in every single podcast? I also always say that Bigfoot, things like Bigfoot, aliens, and ghosts, I think are all related. And that's what I meant when I said that they might be energy beings. I think one of the best ways I heard aliens described, these little green men that people describe, is that they're really more of a high energy ghost than they are a physical being. And some of this, I've heard a lot of stories about people encountering these kinds of aliens that almost do make them sound like they're a type of ghost. I'm probably going to be talking about Skinwalker Ranch next week, or not next week, but the next time I do a podcast, so about 2 weeks from now. And I'm going to be mentioning this place. I don't want to give away too much right now. But this place is nuts. It is, this whole region is on par with Skinwalker Ranch. All sorts of crazy shit. Aliens skinwalkers, Bigfoot, ghosts, demons, all sorts of stuff you can't explain has happened here. And one day, literally the day before the Phoenix Lights, there were lights in the sky, exactly like the Phoenix Lights in this region. The only difference was that they were rotating around the horizon. But essentially, they apparently were just like the Phoenix Lights. Okay, now time for Super Chats. If you guys have sent your Super Chats. Unless I should have checked before, because I might have just embarrassed myself and nobody paid me anything. Alrighty. Alright, we got one from Quintonic. Oh, thank you, Quintonic. It says burger money. Oh, thanks, bud. Yeah. I think I probably will go out for a burger run when I'm done here. Alright. So, I think we're gonna take a quick little break here, and then I'm gonna come back with some stories, some viewer stories. Now remember, if you want your story to be read on the air, the fastest way to have your voice heard, of course, is to send me a super chat. You can also join my Full Metal Tuxedo Discord, and you can put your super chats into the live stream insiders chat. I'll read them live on the air. Kitty Cat says, they have such thick bones because they drink their daily bovine juice. Well, that might be true. And Hunter says, Hunter says, been a while since I've been able to listen live. Been having a lot going on in my life recently. Working late hours. Work right now listening to my headphones. Great show so far. It's the only thing getting me through all this overtime. Well, good look at work, bud. Yeah, I'll be back in about 3 minutes or so to read your stories. Oh, yeah, so that's the other way to have your story heard. Send me an email at fullmetaltuxedo@gmail.com. I prefer voice notes. I can play your recording over the air. Just make sure you put a little blurb in the email telling me what the story's about. Or you can just type it out. Most people have been typing their stories out. Welcome back to Full Metal Tuxedo Podcast. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, music is provided by Samtar. Link is in the description. Love your stuff, Samtar. The opening song is Mother of the Void, which is my favorite song of his. Thought I'd play something a little different for the midway point here, though. Something a little bit more fun. Anyways, we should get into some stories, shouldn't we? So I hope you guys are all having a good night. You know, with the pandemic still going on, I'm sure everybody's still a little frustrated with the situation in your local. I know that there was just another lockdown announced in Sydney, Australia. Oh God, that's frustrating. You know, the rollout of the vaccines is kind of slow. I haven't had my first shot yet. I'm still on a waiting list. And meanwhile, I'm hearing that other people are getting their second already. It's just absolute shit show over here in Canada. Luckily, we had a big lockdown condition that just ended recently, but it doesn't really feel like things are back to normal yet. You know, I still really haven't interacted with many people in the meat world since this all started. But you know, I'm enjoying continuing this tradition of hanging out with you guys every other Saturday night, talking about weird, stupid stuff that you can't talk about with the people in your lives because they just will think you're crazy. Well, I don't think you're crazy. Than me. I'm the crazy one. So our first one here is from Nick. Dr. Nick. So Dr. Nick here says, I have a few paranormal stories to share, and I hope that you find them interesting. I'm going to start on a wholesome note, and it's going to get much darker from here, I promise you. All right, that's interesting. I lived in the same house my entire childhood and teenage years. I would play outside a lot when I was younger, and I often, every few months or so, at no particular time, saw a little girl ride by on her bike. From the south end of the street to the north. She was older than me. She had a red bicycle and pink fluffy coat. No matter the time of the year I saw her, it stuck out. Sorry, it stuck out to me because it would be sweltering summer weather occasionally, and she'd still be wearing that coat. Ooh, that is really bizarre. When I tried to say hello to her, she never seemed to hear me. Oh, maybe you're just striking out. Maybe you're just striking out, Nick. But when I waved, she would often smile and wave back. Oh, that's interesting. Of course, I just assumed that she was a kid who lived in the neighborhood and thought little of it, often waving to her as she passed by. Well, as I got older, I kept seeing her, but I started to notice that she was younger than me. In fact, she never changed. She was always roughly 7 to 8 years old and looked exactly the same every time I saw her. Ooh, until I moved away from the house. Once I realized that she didn't change, I started to look for other anomalies about her whenever I saw her, but I didn't notice anything. She always looked like a regular kid. Nothing about her to imply anything out of the ordinary if you only saw her once or twice. But she took the same bike she took the same bike ride over and over, never changing. Well, that's a really interesting story, Nick. Wow. I don't know that I've ever, I've heard ghost stories like this before, but I really, really like the way you structured this one. It's very unique. If you made this up, it's well done. Okay. For the next, I'm going to lump a couple together, but they all have to do with the same particular feeling that I get when it seems something paranormal might be going on. You know the feeling you get when someone is in the room intensively staring at you in the back of your head, and your immediate reaction is to turn around? This feeling is much like that, only it's omnidirectional and quite uncomfortable as a result. I would always get this feeling in the house that I lived in when I was younger, specifically in the basement, and more specifically in the storage space beneath the basement stairs. I did my best to avoid the area and would never go into the basement alone until I was about 16. And even then, the area would induce a visceral fear response, and I would feel compelled to run. I had an incredibly vivid recurring dream where I would step out of bed, go down the stairs, and go through the basement door, and down those stairs, then walk into the storage space and stop. The dreams were always warm and inviting when they were happening, but incredibly creepy when I woke up. Ooh, that's really weird. So, you're suggesting here almost like, in one sense it was trying to invite you, in the other it was clearly unwelcoming or unsettling. Okay. The first time I had this feeling outside of the area was when I was about 5 or 6, playing with a friend of mine in my room. The feeling came over me and I felt compelled to look out the window. I saw this large dark shape flying through the air faster than I'd ever seen move. It was big, like twice the size of the full-grown man. Okay. And just looked like a massive piece of black fabric. Okay, with nothing distinguishable underneath except a humanoid head atop it and to scale with the rest of it. Whoa, that's really bizarre. So this big amorphous man-like sheet of fabric. That sounds a lot like the Black Knight satellite, doesn't it? As it was zooming by my window from the north to the south, it stopped right in front of... it stopped right in front of it, probably 30 yards out of our backyard. My friend and I scrambled to the window, and I was not the first to move I was not the first to move, so I know I wasn't the only one who saw it. It slowly turned its head to face us. We ducked beneath the windowsill before slowly peeking over the edge. It turned back to the direction it was originally facing and flew away, even faster than it was moving before. I immediately started to run down the stairs, and we both told my mom, but she chalked it up to being a blanket since it was a very windy day. When Prisoner of Azkaban came out a few years later, she wondered why the Dementors bothered me. Oh, Dementors. I see. So I'm not a Harry Potter fan. They are quite different, of course, but similar enough to remind me. That's interesting. And I'll go over one more of his stories here. He's got a bunch more that I'll read another night here. Okay, so when my mother wished to move out of that house a few years ago, I helped her with finding a new one, since she was often working when homes in the area were available for showings. Most of them were overpriced or in poor condition, but there was one among the 20 or so that I went to see with my aunt, who was living with my mother at the time, that was the right size for the right price, that stood out. We went to view it while my mother was at work, and the realtor showed it was quite nice. Okay, so the moment I stepped foot on the property, I immediately felt like I was being watched, but without a sense of where it was coming from. So I ignored it. We looked at the living room and the kitchen first, which were nice, but nothing remarkable. Then went down to the basement. I felt more comfortable in the basement. The feeling had faded a bit. It was unfinished, all concrete, and there was a curtained off corner with a 6-foot industrial sink and a drain on the floor, which was a little odd. Yeah, that's a giant fucking sink. Holy shit. I could fit in that. So that's okay. From there, I toured the master bedroom and then the second bedroom, and the feeling mounted when I entered the second bedroom. My entire body was screaming at me to run, and I was unsure why. I looked to the wall on the left of the door, which shared with the master bedroom, and the feeling worsened. The entrance to the attic on the wall against the ceiling, apparently L-shaped across, which I had never personally seen before, and about a foot below, the wall jutted out into the room by a foot and continued straight down to the floor way. Okay, so the realtor tried to sell it as a shelving space, but it was so high up and right in front of the attic access, it would have been really impractical to keep anything up there. There were no outlets or obvious plumbing in the wall. It wasn't load-bearing, and even if it was, it wouldn't make sense for the bottom. Twice as wide as the shelf. Okay, very interesting. So there was nothing remarkable about the wall from the other side, and the texture of the... So I wonder why you were getting this weird feeling. So he says, I was quick to get out of there after that. Needless to say, we didn't buy the house. Interesting. So I will say, though, Nick, that this bizarre feeling that there's something there and that you need to run, this is something that David Paulides talks a lot about in his Missing 411 videos. He's mentioned several, we'll call them survivors of bizarre situations where it seemed like something bad was going to happen. Somebody got this just strong sense that they needed to get the hell out of there. And then after they did, something weird would happen. Or they would see something after they got that feeling, like something shimmery, like a weird shadow figure or something. All right. Well, thank you for the story, Nick. I'll read the rest of your stories later. I know I said I'd read them all, but you did. You wrote me a whole novel here. There's a whole other section exactly that long, so that's perfect for next time. So here we go. Simon says, "Love the podcast. Keeps me company on my drives to work. I have a collection of stories of UFOs and high strangeness and ghosts. Feel free to use my name." Well, I already did, Simon. So high strangeness in Japan. This isn't super keep. Just a case of high strangeness. This was from a time I was in Japan on my own. I was in one of the old capitals called Nara. I'd been before several years back, so I'd already done most of the touristy stuff. I decided just to go for a walk and see where it took me. The walk eventually led me to some kind of walking trail behind a shrine on what seemed to be the outskirts of the city. I decided to see where the trail led, as it was lined with hundreds of Buddha statues. Some looked centuries old and others looked only months or years old. As I followed it, I felt fine until the trail continued into the forest mountains. At this point, the statues stopped. After taking a few steps beyond this point, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got this strong feeling that I should not go any further. Like something or someone was telling me if I did, something bad would happen to me. Uh-oh. So I turned around and followed the trail back. As soon as I was back on the trail with the statues, the feeling went away. I'm not sure if the statues offered some kind of protection, or if there's just something primal in people's brains that tells you not to go into creepy forests. Ooh, that's a really, really good story. I love that that perfectly correlated with what I just fucking said 10 seconds before I read the story. That's amazing. Okay, high strangeness dream. So details might be a little sketchy, but I remember a lot considering I very rarely remember my dreams. I'm not sure if what I experienced, it was probably just a really vivid dream. But I do wonder sometimes if maybe it was some kind of experience I do with a past life or maybe screen memory. I had a dream where I was an American paratrooper in World War II, somewhere in France, I'm assuming. Ooh, and that was a real thing. Those paratroopers that were sent in right before D-Day, they were sent over in small groups in a fleet of wooden gliders, and hundreds of these guys they parachuted into random areas all across France. Tons of them got lost and separated. It was such a mess. But those guys set up so much stuff for the D-Day landers. Okay, so full disclosure, I'm really interested in World War II history and the 101 paratroopers in particular. Okay, so this probably explains this part of the dream. Anyways, I was in a squad of paratroopers, maybe 5 or 6, camping out in a ruined stone farmhouse at night. I was going to swap over with whoever was on watch for that night, but they'd fallen asleep. I put my hand on them to wake them up, and when I did, they were startled and they stuck their bayonet into me, just under my rib cage. on my left side. I remember gasping and feeling like I'd been feeling like I'd been winded while trying to say, "It's me," over and over, but I could barely say it. I could hardly breathe. Also, distinctly remember feeling the bayonet slide in. I'd never felt anything like it before. I woke up abruptly shortly after that in a sweat. But I didn't actually think much of it then. Wow. That was really vivid dream. Okay. By the morning, I'd all but forgotten the dream. Got up and started getting ready for work or class or whatever, and was going that, or whatever I was going that day. I was in the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and it hit me. I remembered the dream completely, down to the bayonet going into my rib cage on the left side. I literally felt it was there. Oh man, I literally felt it then and there while awake. The feeling of going in, and I gasped for air. Oh my God, that would be kind of terrifying to experience that twice. Feeling like I'd been winded. Okay, it freaked me the hell out, and I'd never had an experience like that ever again, but I still remember. Now, it's possible that was psychosomatic, that you experienced some sort of hyperventilation or something like that, because you panicked, or your muscles might have seized up in your diaphragm in a panic state when you remembered that feeling, and it just, because it was like a vivid memory. But I do think that that's really interesting. I mean, I know that I dream. I remember that I've dreamed, but by the time I've woken up, I'll have forgotten the dream. But usually if I do remember it, it will come to me in that same way, where I'll just like be, oh, that was a weird dream, and I'll go about my day. But then all of a sudden, the entire dream will hit me like a Mack truck. Okay. And he has another story here. My brother's UFO encounters. All right. I've got 2 UFO encounters my brother told me about. So this is a secondhand account. You can send me secondhand accounts as well. I prefer first-hand accounts, but second-hand accounts are just as good. As long as you're telling a story that, you feel like you can properly demonstrate, as well as the person that told it to you. So, and, saying it's your brother, saying it's somebody you're related to, your wife, husband, somebody really close to you, that makes it 1,000 times better. It was my neighbor that I used to know sometimes. I would have a drink with him once a month. Like, that's not that interesting. Anyways, okay, so it was a few years back or so forgive me if I'm vague on the details. As I've said before, my brother is a magnet for this shit. I know you, Greg, have the theory that they're all connected. I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with that, but the fact that my brother has had so many ghost encounters and UFO encounters, it might lend something to that theory. Ooh, well then, Simon, you and your brother, I gotta have a conversation with you guys, because I think I love that. I love that this is proving my theory correct here. But that's another thing, though. You could argue that maybe this kind of wacky shit happens to specific people because we're crazy. So like someone like me witnesses these sorts of supernatural things from a wide variety of different avenues of supernatural phenomenon because I'm crazy and my brain doesn't register information properly. Or there's certain people that are more sensitive to this kind of thing, and that whatever it is that these things are, that they all communicate to us through the same sensory inputs. And whatever that is, I'm not going to speculate right here and now, It'd be cool to do an episode on that, though. What it is that makes certain people more sensitive to those sorts of phenomenon. Anyway, I'm rambling. This is not about me. I've done a pretty good job of not talking about myself today. Please put a thumbs up in the chat to congratulate me for how awesome I am, for not talking about how awesome I am for the entire podcast. So anyways, first encounter was from several years back, maybe 2015-ish. My brother used to visit his friend's farm outside of a small county town that's a couple of hours from where I live. He would go out there to drink, hunt, and just get up to some dumb stuff like bowling. Blowing up appliances. Your brother sounds awesome. Can I be friends with him? He told me lots of stories about seeing strange lights in the sky moving in odd ways, but I got the impression they could have been anything. This time was different. He has several people who were with him who can back up his story. Right. And so that's the part that makes me think that this is not just something that it's like a crazy people thing. Because often, like 90% of the time, that's something that's actually like mind-blowingly wacky, nonsensical, supernatural, unexplainable that happens. That there's always somebody else there, or not always, 90% of the time, somebody else there that can corroborate that story. And that's what makes it feel more real to me, is that we're not talking about just one person's inability to register information. It's that clearly something was happening that everybody is registering the exact same way. So one night, several of them were out spotlighting, hunting with two utes. Oh, this is definitely the right Simon, because a ute is Australian for truck. When they saw something odd on the hillside, maybe 1 kilometer in front of them, several glowing orbs moving in and around the hillside. I'm assuming they were white, given he didn't say otherwise. At first, they thought maybe they were people with torches moving around, but the hillside that they were looking at was so steep that you'd have to be on all fours just to go up it, and the lights were moving far too quickly for that to be the case. Ooh, that's really interesting. That's the lights moving across hilltops or hillsides. That seems to be one of the more common UFO sightings. And there is a good chance that any of us could have seen one of these sorts of hillside lights, as people describe them, that's a UAP or a UFO, and not have realized it because our brain would have told us that it was a car or maybe somebody with a flashlight in the distance. It's only when you like really pay attention to these lights and you start to notice that they're not behaving normally that it will dawn on you that it's not just somebody with a flashlight. Despite being armed, they were so freaked out that they switched all their lights off in the cars, including the headlights, and slowly reversed until they were out of view. They never saw it again after that. Ooh, that's a good story. So, second story happened on the mountains just outside of where I live. So that's another thing, guys. That's another thing. Why is it that mountains are a hot spot for supernatural phenomenon? This is something that's even in the fucking Bible. Like, Moses talked to God on top of a mountain. Jesus did his sermon on top of a mountain. He talked to Moses and God on top of a mountain. Stuff always, like, the worship, God resides or communicates with prophets on mountaintops. And that's why the Tower of Babel was such a sin, because they were trying to build their own mountain to create the terms in which God communicated with them. And God said, no, I create the terms, destroyed the fake mountain, and sent everybody on their way. It'll be really fun discussing that with you guys. So anyways, again, this was seen by multiple people with him. He was up in the mountains with friends collecting firewood when they noticed a star that looked a lot brighter than the others. But they didn't think too much of it and kept cutting, until they noticed it was getting bigger and brighter. At this point, they realized it was coming towards them. There was no noise, so it could not have been a helicopter. My brother dropped the chainsaw and jumped into the four-wheeler and gunned it down the mountain as the light followed them. God, I don't blame him. God damn, I would have jumped on the ATV and just bolted too. I'm not sure at what point, but it either stopped following them or they had lost it. Problem is, though, the chainsaw was borrowed and it was expensive. After some time, they mustered up the courage to go back to try to find the chainsaw. They got back to where they were. They got back to where they were, and the light was back in the same place they had first noticed it. Okay, so they got back to where they got back to where the chainsaw was, and that they noticed that that light was back in its original position next to the mountain. That's crazy. That's crazy. But as soon as they got there, it started moving towards them again. So he grabbed the chainsaw and threw it in. Yeah, okay. But as soon as they got there, it started moving towards them again. So he grabbed the chainsaw and threw it in and floored it away again. This time, it didn't seem to chase them like it did the last time, and they just headed home. Wow. And he says, I have other stories with more detail. Well, Simon, you got to send me the other stories if there's more, because these were good. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Simon. I appreciate these so much. Let's do another one, guys. Let's do another one. Hi, Greg. My name is Sage. Hello, Sage. I see colored lights almost every day. Every day. Every day is exactly the same. You got the freaking 9-inch nails life going. Okay, so it started as a child. I'd say from 4 years old till I was 12 or 13. I figured they were pixies. I would have assumed, honestly, the same thing. Because that's what they call them in Europe and Scandinavia and stuff, is fairy lights, right? When I got older, in my 20s, I figured that it was my imagination. I wouldn't see these orbs for many years. I'm 33 now. I've had many strange experiences throughout my life, but for now, I will stick to the orb stories. Until 3 years ago, I started to see these lights again, just like my childhood. It was a golden one in an old townhouse I lived in, like a little star that blinked in and out. They were intermittent, like balls of light, but not the kind of orbs people on ghost hunting shows would talk about. The ones on TV would move in weird patterns, which I thought, these are just bugs or dust or water droplets or something moving in the wind. I agree, 90% of the light aberrations and things that you see in ghost hunting shows are usually just dust particles that are moving in front of a night vision lens. And people tend to forget that when you're watching footage that's night vision footage, infrared footage, that there's a huge spotlight on your camera, and anything that you point your camera at is going to reflect light directly back at it. So if a dust particle or a bug flies in front of the lens, it's going to look like a giant ball of light. Okay. So, however, oh God, I'm starting to lose my voice. All right, this is definitely going to be the last story. However, the ones I see are not like this at all. They would pop in, then pop out, either directly in my line of sight or in my periphery. I would worry. I'm not saying this to disparage you, Sage. I'm just saying that in my own experience, if this was happening to me, I would start to worry that there was something wrong with my vision or my sight. But I don't know. Maybe if I could see what you were seeing. Let's move on though. They would last about less than a second or two at a time, sometimes longer. Often they are alone. Other times there are many of them, like shimmers of light. Sometimes they appear like feathers. Okay. Maybe it's not something wrong with your vision. That's interesting. They vary in colors, size, shapes, luminosity, opacity, etc. Although they are orb-shaped 98% of the time, more often than not, they appear as if they're tiny, bright stars. The colors I see most often are yellowish gold or silver white, blue, light blue, indigo, and violet. But I've seen others, just not as often. I had an instance where I'd seen partial apparition ending up as an orb. This was about noon, maybe 1 p.m. I would say over half a year ago, I was in my bedroom laying down to rest for a bit. And I was wide awake. Out of the corner of my eye, I see what looks like someone a little taller than me. But all I could make out was a neck, shoulder, and arm. Okay, that's terrifying. I said out loud to who or whatever that is that I do not accept any negativity in my living space. After I said that out loud, quietly, if you want to be seen, condense yourself into a shape or a sphere or a circle so I can see you easier. And not even a few seconds later, it passed from the bathroom door to my closet door, about 4 feet away. After I see the movement, seconds after I say this, I see right in my direct vision, straight on, this large volleyball-sized grayish white orb pop in for at least 2 seconds. It also had a bit of a translucence to it. That's interesting. Do you know what? That's sort of the way you describe that as appearing direct center in your vision. So that's sort of how I was picturing it at first when I said if that was happening to me, I'd assume it was something wrong with my vision. But if that's the only time something appeared direct center in your vision, then maybe it's not something wrong with your vision. However, what I was going to say is this idea, I actually read a story just like this in the last podcast. Somebody that said that they don't really have a very good ability to create imagery in their head, yet somehow all of a sudden this image appeared in front of them of what looked like a portal, a ball, like a circle opening up in front of them, and then there was a figure inside. This story made me think of that for some reason. So it sort of started, it sort of startled me at first, mostly because I've never had anything, oh my God, what is wrong with my brain? It sort of startled me at first, mostly because I've never had anything interact with me like this before. I haven't seen anything that intense in my apartment since. I see things like this every day. I've dozens of stories like this, from the emergency room to my grandmother's house, outdoors, etc. But for now, I'll leave it here. If you want, I could send more orb stories. Yes, please do. Send me, this was about 3 stories. Send me 5 stories, your 5 best stories. I would, yeah, I'd love to read more of these. Says, lately I've seen a lot of orange and dark orange, not sure why. But yes, Sage admits here, I couldn't even prove the validity of this if I tried. And no, I don't blame you. But what you're describing, though, sounds like fairy lights. It sounds like fairy people. And so there's orbs of light. This is another, guys, this is another one of those things that I think connects UFOs to ghosts. Is that that's something that they both do. They're often seen as balls of light. So, what do we take from this? What do we learn from this? Well, what we learned is that we got to tune in to the next episode of the Full Metal Tuxedo podcast. And I'll see you guys there next week, or 2 weeks from now. Let's read a couple more super chats, and then we'll I'll head out for the night. I know you guys have all got some partying to do. I got some partying to do. Well, no, I don't. I'm editing tonight. Nuke the Ice Caps says, I got a very short, creepy story for you. Had a dream I woke up brutally wounded and disfigured on an operating table. The doctor told me I had been in a car crash. Considering I drive for a living, I have been super paranoid and cautious for the last couple days. Hope that was not a premonition. God damn, Nuke. That would be terrifying. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I used to work for a living. I used to drive for a living as well. And yeah, I remember having these days that I was just paranoid that a car was going to come out of nowhere and cut my bus in half or something. And Chronic says will-o-wisps. Yes, so that's another term that people often use for these as wisps. I know the Celts, that's what the Celts often call it, wisps. And they behave the exact same way. They're essentially like amorphous lights that seem to behave somewhat intelligently, that they don't move in a very regimented way, that it seems as if something intelligent is determining how they behave, at very least. I've even heard examples of UFOs where it sounded like, this is actually way more common, is that it's almost like the light itself is not really the thing, but it's almost like the light is like a laser pointer. The way that you would screw with your cat by pointing a laser pointer at the floor to get it to chase it. Well, I feel like a lot of these UFO encounters seem very much like that, where people will describe this thing's behavior where it was acting up like it wanted to be seen. It was almost like it was dangling at the end of a string and somebody was reeling in a fishing line and tugging at it to make it look like it was a bug that was suffering on the surface of the water, trying to attract a fish to jump up and grab it. That's a lot of UFOs seem to behave in that way, almost like they're just like they're a distraction. They're something other than the intelligent thing itself. But my other theory is that those balls of light that we think are UFOs are literally intelligent creatures that live in the higher, because they would literally be, as the New Agers would call it, higher vibrational beings. Well, so they live higher up. Well, I think it's more like they're less dense. They're literally less dense, and they can't come very far down here. They can only sort of interact in our upper atmosphere, as it were, because they're so light that they can only maintain their form in higher elevations because there's less pressure. And Chronic says, I heard plenty of good things usually happen when you follow them. Totally. Well, I mean, that was the whole point of the movie Brave, wasn't it? Is that she followed a wisp into the woods and she ended up, well, I mean, that was her own hubris, though. She was the one that decided to curse her mother. Oh, God. Yeah. I hope you guys have seen Brave. Otherwise, I'm just kind of just rambling like a crazy person by myself here. All right, got super chat from Tvis. Says, here's one. Thanks for the stream, Greg. Oh, thank you for the super chat, Tvis. And Cat for Cats. Thank you for the super chat. Very, very specific dollar amount. I couldn't help but notice. Beer money. Thank you for the beer money. Absolutely needed beer money. All right. I had a great time tonight, guys. I know that this was maybe a little bit lackluster compared to other episodes of the podcast, but I really wanted to talk about the UFO UAP report because I was just so pissed about it. How fucking useless it was. I mean, I'm not going to get mad about it again. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. I love hanging out with you guys. I love you guys. You are all legends. Goddamn champions, every single one of you. Thank you, everybody, for the super chats. And thank you to my patrons, of course, the Full Metal Tuxedo podcast Patreon. The link is in the description. It's a separate Patreon from the Armored Skeptic Patreon. But they're both great groups. Both of them get you on to Discord groups. And we talk about all sorts of crazy stuff that you can't talk about in public because people will say you're crazy. Of course, we have no judgment in my Discord servers. You can talk about whatever you want. Whatever crazy shit comes to your mind. Well, you know, within reason. I don't want you pushing propaganda. Have a good night, everybody. Love you all. And I'll see you on the next podcast in 2 weeks. Good night.